Hey guys, Josh and Aaron back for another Finance Friday, and a lot has happened since we shot our last video. Bill 60 has passed. It's probably one of the largest law reforms that has passed since Bill 23. It fundamentally changes a lot for investors, developers, landlords, and tenants. So in today's video, we're going to break down what this actually means for you, high level, so you get an understanding of really what went into this bill and how it's going to affect you moving forward.
During the video, we're going to break this down in kind of three sections. The first part, we're just going to go over the brief synopsis of the bill from just a general summary. Then we're going to dive into a little bit more detail of some of the key pieces that we think are most important. And then at the end, we're going to discuss how these are going to impact you guys as investors and developers in Ontario.
Yeah, so the bill really is intended to streamline development and new housing. You know, right now in Ontario we have a massive problem. Now, you know, vacancy rates might say a little bit different, but the projection is we have about 1.5 million homes we need to build, and there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape right now around getting the actual process of like processing and getting permits for this stuff. So this bill, in a nutshell, hits a bunch of different points from the legislative branch, cutting red tape and allowing like boots on the ground to process permits faster.
So just to summarize some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So there's a few key points that this bill touches. Again, some of these we're not going to discuss in detail just given the size of the bill and the amendments, but we'll keep it to the stuff that's pertaining to you guys. So there's changes to the transit delivery infrastructure relocation pieces, planning and zoning approvals, development charge transparency for our investors and developers. For our landlords, the landlord-tenant dispute resolution, which is obviously a hot topic. Some changes to the road and highway standards and touching on municipal water and wastewater restructuring. The bill in general is really gearing towards making decisions a little bit quicker, restructuring some of the phrases and understanding of the words to make that a little bit more clear, and just expanding powers of the municipality again to allow things to be hopefully a bit quicker.
Yeah, and I think like this is coming from the bill that passed last year federally that pushed some absurd amount of money, like $1 billion or whatever, into cutting that red tape. And obviously, you know, it hasn't moved fast enough, or pressure is finally getting to a point now from federally to municipally, which is forcing them to be able to put this legislation in place. There's a lot of, you know, red tape around NIMBYism still, around not wanting to have the increased density. You know, we hear it all the time in Toronto, and you know, it's slowly creeping into other municipalities as well that are now having to take this more seriously. So I think this is just one step forward in, you know, in pushing that and solidifying that along, as this isn't like something that is maybe going to happen. Like, we are going to increase density, and we do need to find a way to be able to build more homes. And I think both of the people who ran for prime minister ran on this specifically, was we need to build more units. And you know, unfortunately, it's not going to be homes, it'll be units, but the private sector is going to be the only sector that is going to do this efficiently, and you know, that isn't cost prohibitive. So you know, this specific legislation I think is massive for the bigger players in the space and mid-sized guys who really want to, you know, push it and make a difference. And I think there's a lot of unknown right now around DC charges, around, you know, some of these municipalities are waiving them, how long is it going to take to get permits. I think like also lenders are shifting, right? Lenders have had the last 20 years of funding condos, and they're all now getting back into the multifamily space. So just like, you know, creating a little bit more certainty with the approval processes and timing, because a lot of the larger projects, the big money stuff, it's all shifting from condo projects to purpose-built rental projects. So this is kind of laying the infrastructure moving forward for those developments.
Yeah, I think it touched bases on what most people want to see is, you know, trying to accelerate things, which is the whole purpose of this. Now we'll see whether or not it actually speeds anything up, or whether this is just another little piece of like political propaganda to kind of try to help appease everybody. But you know, well, let's dive in a little bit further here.
Yeah, so faster approval timelines. If anybody has done, you know, an actual development, you know that approval timelines are the single biggest roadblock to getting your project off the ground. Historically, you know, some municipalities are worse than others, but this aims to essentially force municipalities, if they aren't moving fast enough, that the government can actually push the approvals forward. So this is pushing the municipalities to be able to actually process things faster. Some of the things that are in this specific part of the bill is as of right variances, so heights and setbacks and density. We're already seeing that with the auto increase density in the GTA. Some PMTSA approvals are streamlined, and meaning more missing middle and mid-rise suites are unlocking right now. And what's interesting to see is the group of people that are already ahead of this, that they saw it a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and the ones who are really doing it, they're creating a whole new type of housing. You have these beautiful buildings now in mature areas, and you have people relocating to these places that you wouldn't necessarily be able to build these like mid-density homes anymore. It's changing the landscape. In addition to that, there's some development charges that are coming into effect. So there's a new land acquisition category now. Essentially what it allows the municipalities to do is to include the cost of land into the total project cost, which I'm assuming is going to inflate the DC fees, which probably isn't a good thing overall, but I'm assuming that also the DC fees for all the condos are way down, so they're trying to find a way to be able to recapitalize themselves on purpose-built rental housing. There's some municipal local service policies that changed, some more DC transparency. Some municipalities are waiving them, some haven't yet. For the missing middle housing, if you're building ground-up construction, you can now have your DC fees waived. There was a bunch of misunderstanding with pre-existing and new construction and what is waived and what's not waived. And unfortunately, if you had a pre-existing building and you misunderstood that you do have to pay the DC fees, or even the HST that came up, but that's a whole other topic. Some people are getting massive HST bills because they use part of the pre-existing structure. There's some Construction Act updates that are pretty antiquated. We can get into, but payment timelines, holdback releases. So if anybody who isn't in development, 10% of your project funding is held back on every draw. So they're making some minor changes with the timeline in which it can be held back. It just allows for more certainty with actual capital going back to the developer. Also some lien termination clarity around who has to pay liens if you have an abandoned project. Essentially just means smoother cash flow and clearer contracts moving forward.
Yeah, something else that we're seeing in the bill here is a shifting of powers between the provincial and municipal levels. The bill is giving more provincial oversight, really just enforcing municipalities to be able to comply now to policy decisions. And, just what this means, and hopefully it's going to allow for fewer political delays and a little bit more predictability when submitting for, any sort of zoning, any sort of construction project, stuff like that. Again, just trying to make things as clear as possible moving forwards. Hopefully that's going to be able to speed things up on the developer's end, more smoother process going forwards. So impacts on developers, lenders, and investors. So we're obviously going to hope for some faster timelines with the increase in clarity, more viable densification as well too. Probably going to be some new underwriting assumptions from the get-go, and then maybe some more competition for good sites. Obviously, as things become a little more clear, the access for investors is going to open up. A little more competition for those who have already been kind of leaning into these new sites and developments.
Yeah, so who really wins in this? I think it's echoing what has already been passed with the missing middle infill developer, the guy who's looking to take advantage of the increased densification. Builders who are trying to build near transit lines. Most municipalities, Kitchener-Waterloo, Toronto, the densification is on major streets and near transit lines. So, this clarity allows for, future development to actually move forward instead of having to go through the rezoning process, which was completely antiquated, took a long time, cost a lot of money. We're seeing even just the delays in that are massive. Historically what you'd have to do is deploy a lot of capital or have a very high carrying cost on private debt, wait a year, 2 years, burn a lot of cash. There's no more of that now, and it's nice to see that these projects can just go from a thought to drawings, permits, construction in the ground and finishing it. It really is making an impact. And last but not least, contractors, they can rely on actual payments. It just gives a little bit more clarity with the lien holdback. Essentially what it looks like they're doing is they're kind of just setting up the framework for the final push. And what we've been saying all along is, I think, the golden age of development. I think the people who want to build are going to have the tools available, and now legislation in act to be able to actually push more development forward in 2026.
So some of the impacts that we're going to see on rental housing, landlords, and then obviously tenants as well too. First thing, obviously hoping for faster purpose-built rental approvals with more density and just more applications being put in. Hopefully the market starts to regulate itself a little bit more. We start to get more clear outlines on how these things are actually going to move through, right? Like as we start to get more development, obviously the guidelines, policies are going to hope to continue to change and for the better to allow things to become a lot more seamless and a lot smoother. And again, just regulating the market a little bit more as well too. So that should produce some positivity moving forwards. From like a landlord and tenant dispute situation, obviously some changes there. Now where the evictions can take place after 7 days instead of the previous 14 days. A little bit better for the landlords. Obviously it's not as big of an issue as what you're kind of seeing maybe on social media from some of the tenant sides. But again, it's it's a small win as well too. And then obviously for any of the disputes they're going to put up from the tenant side, they have to at least have half of the arrears. So again, having the capital on hand to at least get some of that money put up as a deposit should weed out some of those, professional bad tenants that are just kind of there to take advantage of the system. At least prove you have the money, put that half up before taking it to the LTB.
Yeah, I think like Ontario unfortunately has swung too far to the one side, and it was an imbalanced real estate market. I think that landlords have felt as though they've been held hostage with their own asset for quite a while, and it's really important to understand that this bill isn't to evict people. This bill isn't focused to hurt tenants who are following their contracts. What this is doing is it's evening the playing field for bad faith tenants, for people who are not paying rent, who are stealing from landlords. You hear it all the time is the process it takes to get through the landlord tenant board and tribunal to be able to actually process one of these things. It's so favored in the tenant's side that it has created a whole group of bad faith tenants who are essentially ruining it for everybody else. So I think the reform is good because it allows more of an equal playing field. And I think that when you have a system that both takes care of the people, the landlords, but also the tenants, it's going to create a more open market. And history shows that, you take a look at Alberta. Alberta has the lowest rent in all of the country almost, and it has the most lax tenant laws. It has an open market, and historically what happens is if you have an open market, more units are built because tenants and investors want to build more housing because they have more control of their assets. And when you have more housing, you have more options, and if you have more options, you have less people who are stuck feeling that they can't leave because they're paying their $600 or whatever that might be. Unfortunately, I was speaking to somebody the other day about it, and it's kind of like if your arm gets cut and you have to cut it off and cauterize it because it's gonna suck at first because reform is gonna be painful. Unfortunately, it might displace some people, which isn't the case. But if we can move towards an open market and we can build more rental housing and we can have more supply, we can lower the cost of rents, and it can be more open for everybody. People don't have to have the scarcity of worrying about not being able to afford rent because rent is extremely high. So it's kind of like a cart before the horse or a chicken for the egg because you can't have one without the other. But I think the reform really is just to deal with bad actors in the space, and I think the provincial government has heard it from all the landlords, both the ones who are institutional and the small guys, especially the small guys who can't afford to have tenants steal from them and not pay rent. So I think as a whole, just dumping capital into hiring more people, which has been a major issue for years. They're understaffed. Providing resources to the landlord tenant board and creating a clear framework for people to move faster through the process, whether or not it's for the tenant or for the landlord. At least there's a definitive answer to the process, and it's not taking 6 months to get through. Once we have clarity, people can then operate within the framework of the rules. So I think it's a win for Ontario as a whole if we can keep working on that framework, or at least clearing out the landlord-tenant board queue and allowing for disputes to actually process. That's going to be a big win for creating more housing as a whole and bringing more investment back in Ontario.
Yeah, I think if you talk to any landlord that's been through a 60 to 90 day dispute, like the 7 days, it's nice, but I mean at the end of the day, that's 7 days compared to a 60-day dispute, it's not as big of an impact. It's a nice to have. I think obviously having the tenants having to put up half of the arrears, ahead of time, that's going to be really what should help clear it out. But I mean, the 7 days, in the grand scheme of things, over a 60 to 90 day dispute, it's 7 days to 7 days. It's not like it's going to cut it in half, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the bill as a whole, helps a handful of different actors within the space. It helps our developers. Yeah, hopefully, it clears out streamlines the process provincially, municipally, and allows for maybe some of these municipalities that aren't necessarily on board yet, get that little push they need to be able to actually move forward. Kitchener Waterloo, for example, allow 5 units, on a lot, or like understand why the increased densification works. Like, you need 5 units on a lot, or to be able to build 5 units over multiple lots to be able to allow for the missing middle development. So, hopefully it pushes the decision makers to maybe understand, the requirements to build this stuff. I think there's a hand who actually develops, and then there's a hand who makes the policy, and unfortunately they aren't aligned at the moment. So it looks as though we're moving in the right direction, and this bill essentially helps everybody, who's in the rental space, and I think we're going to see more progress moving forward 2026.
Yeah, I think obviously the bill as a whole, there's some positive things to be able to taken out from here. Hopefully this really does start to expedite the process. Hopefully it does help to start to, smooth out some of the landlord-tenant board disputes as well too. And some of the investors are going to be able to get, their investment back, or at least, some of the damages that they've had to dealt with a little bit quicker. Hopefully the tenants are getting out a little bit quicker to prevent some of those damages as well too, and smooth out that process. So again, for those that are involved, obviously we recommend you take a look and read through this yourself. Just have a bit more of a in-depth understanding, as a lot of this is going to apply to your project. So, as always, we appreciate you guys watching and sticking around for the full video. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. It just helps us make more content, and we'll see you guys in the next video.